So, that is... Dear all, dear members of parliament, dear esteemed guests, as a chair of today's hearing, I'm honored to welcome you all to the EPP Group hearing, Reinforcing EU Sanctions, Eastern EU Border States Experience, a topic that is even more crucial in light of recent developments in the United States. Information about interpretation, it will be provided in German, English, French and Polish. Of course, you all are conscious that we find ourselves in a defining moment in Europe's history. Russia's illegal and unprovoked war against Ukraine continues to pose a grave threat, not only to Ukraine's sovereignty, but also to the security and stability of entire European Union. And the strength of our response and ability to adapt to emerging challenges will determine of our democracy's shared values and geopolitical stability, the future of it. To counter these ongoing threats, it is vital that the European Union and the member states increase pressure on Russia through stronger and more effective sanctions enforcement, and I underline enforcement and control. Addressing this issue is imperative. The evolving nature of sanctions circumvention networks and enforcement challenges at our borders requires urgent and sustained action. The EU sanctions regime against Russia, which is now in its 16th package, has been an essential instrument in limiting Russia's war capabilities and also economic resilience, which is even more important. We have made significant progress targeting key sectors of Russia's economy, freezing assets and crippling access to military technologies. In today's hearing, we will focus on key questions such as the unique challenge faced by Eastern EU border countries, exploring ways to support and enhance the capabilities of frontline member states. Secondly, how cooperation between the authorities of Finland, the Baltic States and Poland can serve as a model for broader European coordination in restricting Russia's ability to sustain the war effort and circumvention of sanctions. And thirdly, identifying common compliance challenges faced by companies, raising awareness between public sector and business community. And I'm very happy that to address these and other questions, we invited distinguished experts from both enforcement and policy fields. We are honored to welcome our keynote speaker, Mr. David O'Sullivan, International Special Envoy for EU Sanctions. And also, we are grateful for a special intervention by His Excellency Vsevolod Chenzov, Head of Mission of Ukraine to European Union. And after their remarks, there will be a panel with experts. Mr. Raimons Zukulis, Director of National Customs Board of Latvia, Jiri Häkämies, Managing Director of Confederation of Finnish Industries, Mrs. Veronika Friedrichek, I hope I pronounced correctly your name, Poland's representative to Political and Security Committee, and as you know, Poland is the presidency of the EU currently, and Mrs. Elina Rybakova, Director of International Affairs Program and Vice President of Foreign Policy at the Kiev School of Economics. She will join us remotely. And then after the panel, there will be a debate. So I kindly request that you prepare your questions and that speaker, and also please, I will not introduce the speakers. CVs are available in the room and you can read them and reference to them. And before we move to our next agenda item, I will pass the floor to Mr. Andrzej Halicki, Vice Chair of the EPP Group for External Policies, and he will provide us with introductory remarks. I would like also to thank EPP Presidency for supporting this very current and important item. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. I would like to thank you for the initiative. This is a very important subject, especially now when we have tough and a little bit unstable situation. We have to know what to do and why we have to do. And sanction is also one of the very important tools, not only economic tools, political tools, but in the longer perspective, even so important as military action, because we have still one aggressor on our continent. It's Russia. And because I'm from Poland, and I would like to also welcome Madam Ambassador, before David and Sivowat will take a floor, I would like to emphasize that 5th of March, it's the 85th anniversary of a cruel murder. 22,000 of Polish officers were killed in Katyn in 1940. And even today, the Russia says that this is German guilty or lies every day on the history. From this time, we had a lot of changes of the situation, but you have to remember that after the Second World War, the occupation of many countries didn't stop. In early 90s, we had the geopolitical change, and millions of Russian soldiers left close to 20 countries without using an army, even during that fight. Why? Because of the very strong political pressure, organized and supported by very strong political leaders from the same political group. But I don't like to emphasize our EPP role, because the Republicans and the Christian Democrats from many countries were, during that time, very closely together. Ronald Reagan, Helmut Kohl, Margaret Thatcher. I would like to mention several of the crucial names. Why I'm talking about? Because we have, first of all, 16 packages. Sometimes I have comments, oh, so many packages. Well, the sanctions don't work. This is not true. And we have to know how to explain what we have to improve, how to prolong, how to maintain, because this is very important weapon. The second thing, I think, which is very important, these are Russian assets. So we have frozen assets, and we are still not, have no common decision how to use them, to repair all what Russians do. And I think that we have also several other questions to be asked, because we have a problem of third countries. We have the problem of animal trade. But this is, I think, something additional to the most important and key issue which is in the title, how to maintain, how to strengthen the policy of sanction, especially today when we have a question mark on the other bank of Atlantic Ocean. We have to be united, and we have to know that this is good direction, efficient direction, and we have to work on. The specialists are with us on the left and the right side, and then I would like to also ask you for the participation in this very important debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrzej. And now I would ask David O'Sullivan to proceed with your introductory remarks.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here. As you both have mentioned, of course, we live in interesting times. I sometimes struggle to find the right quotation. I hope you'll forgive me. Some of you may not like the origin of this quotation, but as Lenin said, there are decades in which nothing happens and then weeks in which decades happen. And I think it feels a bit like that just at the moment, doesn't it? Ever since the full-scale invasion in February of 2022, we have pushed back very strongly to support Ukraine, of course, militarily, economically, macroeconomic assistance, humanitarian assistance, but also very, very strong sanctions, unprecedented sanctions, to be very frank. And we've had 16 packages, as Mr. Halicki has indicated. But I think sometimes you just have to step back and understand quite the importance of these sanctions and what we have achieved, bearing in mind that we've had to do so with unanimity of our member states in the decisions. Russia was our fifth largest trading partner in 2021, representing 5.8% of our total trade in goods, equivalent to about 260 billion trade every year. 3 years later, as a result of our sanctions, that trade now represents about 68 billion. That's a decrease of 74% in our bilateral trade with Russia. And that gives you some idea of the scale of the sanctions which we have imposed. And when you look at the revenue side in particular, imports of oil from Russia have decreased by 90%, and imports of gas have gone from 45% of our market down to 13%. Now, of course, you can always choose to look at the fact that there is still some trade and there is still some imports, but I think to have achieved all of that in 3 years is quite remarkable. And I think it represents the strength of feeling of support for the people of Ukraine in this moment of Russian aggression, which, as many have said, is not just aggression against Ukraine, but is in fact aggression, I think, against everything that we stand for in this European Union. The main objectives have been to deprive Russia of the technology needed to make sophisticated weaponry, to impact on the revenue available to the Russian government to sustain this war, and also to impose a relatively high cost on Russia's industrial infrastructure in response to their unprovoked aggression. And I think one thing that is very important to keep repeating is that these sanctions are working. They are not perfect, and I will come to that, and I'm sure some of the people will want to talk about how we can always do better on the enforcement side. But the fact remains that we have had a remarkable impact on the Russian economy. We estimate that Russia has about $450 billion less to spend than they would otherwise have had if there were not sanctions. And if you look at the impact on the Russian economy, and I'm sure Elena Rybakova, who joins us remotely from the Peterson Institute or from Kyiv, I'm not sure, she works in both. She's a very, very expert on the Russian economy. But there is a sort of false narrative out there that somehow the Russian economy is doing fine. Oh, they have growth of 3 or 4%. I was interviewed by a French journalist a couple of weeks ago, and he said, Mr. Sullivan, the Russian economy is growing at 4%. In France, we'd love to have that. And I said, right. And would you love the 21% interest rate? Would you like the official inflation rate of 10% and the real inflation rate of more likely 20 or 25%? Would you like the fact that 1/3 or nearly 40% of Russian public expenditure is now going to the military? Or the fact that that represents nearly 7 or even 8% of GDP? The Russian economy is suffering, and suffering badly. Mr. Putin has been forced into cannibalizing the civil economy in order to run a war economy. Now, you can do this for a certain period of time, but it is not infinitely sustainable. And I think most economic experts who've been looking at the situation are of the view that there is going to be a reckoning in the course of this year, rather than even the course of next year, which were some of the earlier predictions. So our sanctions are putting extreme pressure on Mr. Putin. And I believe that we should not relieve that pressure other than in the context of a durable solution, as President von der Leyen said in Kyiv 10 days ago. It would be absolutely foolhardy to lift our sanctions or to lessen our sanctions just at the very moment when they are having the maximum pressure. Now, the enforcement of our sanctions has posed a huge challenge, of course, for our member states, because we've never had sanctions like these. If you take the previous examples, for example, against Iran, it was essentially an oil embargo. And it therefore required mainly foreign policy interventions and some choices. These sanctions against Russia reach deep into the economic and commercial fabric of all our member states. And this has posed unique challenges of implementation in all our member states. And particularly, and I do recognize this, for the border states, those countries who are in the front line. I've had the occasion to visit the customs authorities in Estonia and in Latvia and in Lithuania. I had occasion to visit a border crossing with Belarus in Lithuania. So I understand the extent to which those countries with a frontier, and that includes, of course, Poland and Finland, do experience particular challenges in implementing these sanctions. But I think we have done a remarkable job, and the results are there to see in the figures I gave you earlier. Now, in terms of circumvention, I think it's very important to understand two things. Firstly, we were forced to adopt these sanctions as autonomous sanctions and not UN-mandated sanctions. This means that the rest of the international community is not obliged to follow our sanctions. And indeed, let us be frank, many of them really don't like autonomous sanctions and are pushing back. Secondly, for different reasons, but mainly in order not to disrupt the economic situation of the global south, we have not pushed for an oil embargo, for a complete ban on the export of Russian oil. So it is still possible and legal for Russia to continue to export particularly oil, though we have introduced as the G7 coalition the oil price cap, which at $60 a barrel. And indeed, this price cap has been effective. The gap between the price of Brent oil and Urals oil has consistently been somewhere in the region of $10, $12, $13. So Russia is obtaining much less revenue for their oil exports than might otherwise have been the case. We have had circumvention here on the shadow fleet, and I will come back to that in a moment. But the oil price cap has had an impact on Russian revenue. Now, in focusing on circumvention, what I have been doing in particular is focusing on those products which are most needed by the Russian military in order to make smart and intelligent weaponry. We were able to produce, jointly with the US, the UK, Japan, and the Ukrainian colleagues, a list of 50 products, 50 tariff lines, not 50 products, which are most consistently found in Russian weapons on the battlefield. And these are the products that we have been trying to prevent Russia from circumventing. We have had some success in Central Asia, in the Caucasus, in Turkey, in UAE, in Serbia. But I am conscious that Russia still can get these products, but the issue is to make it harder, to make it slower, to make the supply chain less predictable, and above all else, to make it more expensive. And Russia is now paying probably as much as 150% more for these products than was the case before the war. So this is what our essential job in implementation and in fighting circumvention is about continuously putting sand in the Russian military-industrial machine to make it more difficult for it to operate. I know that in terms of circumvention, we have reached out a lot to European industry. I sometimes hear critical remarks about European industry. I have to say, I think our industry has taken compliance with sanctions very, very seriously. That is not to say that there are not examples of deliberate sanctions circumvention, and I very much welcome the work of investigative journalists and NGOs who have exposed these cases, and they must continue to do so. But equally, our member states are working very hard, and every time I travel to a member state, I see that the police, the customs, the judicial authorities, the prosecutors are working hard in identifying deliberate cases of sanction circumvention. Sanction circumvention is a European crime. And we have recently adopted, you have adopted, this Parliament and the Council, a directive seeking to make more equal the penalties which are applied in all our member states, because these were very unequal. And we are seeing a growing number of prosecutions of people who are circumventing sanctions. They are a minority, a very small minority, but it's very important that they be pursued, and when convicted, it's very important that we give publicity to these convictions so that people understand the seriousness of the crime, which is sanctions circumvention. In addition, I think we need much greater cooperation between our member states. There has not always been a tradition of exchanging information about sanction circumvention or about how products get licensed or how exceptions or derogations are managed. And I know certainly that the frontline states sometimes feel that they are in receipt of goods which, when they look at it, they wonder, well, why is this going to Russia? This can only be solved through improving channels of communication between member states. And this is happening, I have to say, on a much bigger scale than before. So we are learning how to do this better. The fact that we have that the adoption of sanctions is something done at European level, but that the implementation is at national level, obviously opens up differences of interpretation, legitimate differences of interpretation between 27 customs and economic ministries, and we have to work very hard at trying to make this more even and more evenly applied. So my essential message, Chair, is that sanctions are a hugely important part of our assistance to Ukraine, that these sanctions are having a considerable impact, and that they absolutely must be maintained and strengthened as part of our continued leverage on Russia in order to enable us to arrive at a sustainable and lasting peace. The cooperation with the United States has been exemplary in this regard. Like others, I fear this may not continue necessarily to be the case. I hope it will, but I think we have to prepare for the possibility that it might no longer be the case. And we need to bear in mind that we trade much more, or used to trade much more with Russia than the United States, and that even on their own, European sanctions will continue to have a huge impact on the Russian economy, and we should not lose sight of that. Finally, talking about quotations, Madam Chair, one that comes back to mind is from my compatriot Yeats' poem, The Second Coming, which contains the great line about the best lack passion and the worst are full of passionate intensity, but it also contains the great line, the center cannot hold. Increasingly, the European Union and our friends in Europe are going to be the center of continued support for Ukraine, and we absolutely must hold. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I would like to assure you, David, that we in EPP, we are fully conscious that sanctions work and that the strengthening of sanctions is of utmost importance and that we have to hold to that. And now, since Mr. O'Sullivan has other engagements, there is some space for a few questions, 2, 3 maximum, and I will collect the questions. But I would like to stress that question is not a comment. Now we are asking, let's begin Mr. Sherba, Mr. Galler, and I don't see your, sorry, yeah. Can you?
Very difficult.
Because I have
It's
rather
a difficult
poor
pronunciation. Marta Wcisło from the Polish delegation.
I will address you as Marta. That is easy. Yeah, let's begin with Gerba, then Michael Galler, and third is Marta. That is the fourth question. Okay, let's go, please.
Thank you, Sandra, for organizing this event, and thank you, Andrzej. My question to Special Envoy for EU Sanctions, Mr. Sullivan, is very simple. It's very timely because we are still discussing the suspension of U.S. Military aid to Ukraine. We are also informed that there is still discussion going on in the U.S. administration about limiting the U.S. sanction against Russia. So could you a little bit elaborate how this cooperation between our sanctions, the EU sanctions and American sanctions looked like? And second, can you predict any problems in the future on this issue? Thank you.
Thank you, Mikhail.
Yes, my question goes in this direction. You said there is a lack of cooperation between member states, obviously, or apparently, when it is about exchange of information. So, well, perhaps there was a hint that our Eastern members are cooperating a bit more. But is there an existing one, some kind of a platform here in Brussels where member states could exchange such information? Or is it existing and not used? Or if it is not existing, shouldn't there be one and also have some way of forcing member states to do it? And the other huge issue of sanctions, well, we are discussing here ways and means to get hold of the substance of the Russian frozen assets. I think that would really be a huge sanction. The Commission is dwelling about that since 3 years. But I read something that there might be an idea developed, so in case there is a ceasefire and the Russians are breaking it, that then there might be this effect. I think that was a French proposal. Have you heard anything in this regard? Is anything moving on getting hold of the frozen assets?
Thank you, Mikhail. And now Marta, please.
Thank you. I will be speaking Polish. I come from Poland, from the area of Lublin, close to our external border. But that is not the topic of my question. The EU introduced sanctions on Russian gas. Russian gas in 60% is the most important component of fertilizers, and it is something that flooded the EU and it caused huge problems on the market. The European Commission introduced customs, and they have not been introduced, in fact, but very recently Ursula von der Leyen told us that the Russian economy is based mostly on oil and oil products. Hence my question, can sanctions be introduced not solely on oil and gas, but also on other oil products that sustain the Russian war effort and are the main source of resource for the Russian economy? Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. And now Sandra, my colleague, Lithuanian colleague, Sandra.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this very important event. Dear Mr. Sullivan, you presented very concrete numbers, and I'm very happy to hear how the Russian economy is suffering. The inflation, like more than 10%, the interest rates more than 20%, and the real inflation probably 20-25%. But this is an impact of overall sanctions of the world, not only European Union. And you said that if, for example, United States will lift their sanctions, and European Union hopefully will stay with their sanctions, and hopefully other countries like Australia, but what percentage of the impact the European sanctions produce? What percent? And if the United States leaves this boat, how it will affect the numbers of overall impact?
Thank you, David. Do your best.
Yeah. Look, on the issue of US sanctions, we've had excellent cooperation. By the way, we've had excellent cooperation across the whole G7 and the wider sanctions coalition, including Canada, Japan, even countries which are not part of the G7, Australia, New Zealand. We've had excellent international cooperation in aligning our sanctions and in also identifying the impact of our sanctions. And the American contribution has been considerable. And I hope that will continue to be the case, because it seems to me self-evident that in any negotiation, and we are entering now into some kind of negotiation, you want to keep maximum leverage and have the most important bargaining chips at your disposal, and sanctions are very much a part of the bargaining chips that we as the G7 have. But if the United States were, which I sincerely hope that they will not, and we're hearing rumors, but let us, for the time being, the American sanctions remain. If the Americans were to decide to lift their sanctions, I have already indicated the extent to which Europe was a much, much more important trading partner of Russia than was the United States. The European Union holds the vast bulk of the frozen assets, which are under question. So I think we should not underestimate our power as an economic power of the European Union, and with our other European allies, including Norway and the United Kingdom and Switzerland and other countries who are with us, in continuing to exercise leverage which can be used for the purpose of any future negotiations. So, I mean, and when you say what is the impact on the Russian economy, to be very frank, I think it has been the European sanctions that are probably the most damaging to the Russian economy. Of course, if any of the G7 partners were to relax their sanctions, then this weakens the total impact of sanctions. I mean, I'm not naive. But the fact remains, our sanctions are the ones that are really having an important impact. On the question of cooperation between member states, there are platforms. We have our customs colleagues in particular in the DG for tax and customs regularly bring together the customs authorities, but it's more a reflex of bilateral cooperation. So when we have the Latvian Director General of Customs with us, I'll choose Latvia. When Latvia sees a problem with item being put through Latvia to Russia from, let us say, I'll say Ireland, just so I'm not discriminating against any other member state, I'm Irish, and they don't like it, they say, oh, this smells a bit suspicious. We need a kind of hotline that they can phone the authorities in Dublin and say, can you just explain to us why you felt it was okay to authorize this export? It looks a bit suspicious. That's the kind of exchanges we need. And this, frankly, was not happening on a regular basis for understandable reasons. Now we need to put that in place. And I notice that particularly the frontline states have been cooperating together in trying to have some common interpretations, and at the same time reaching out to other member states from which most of the exports come in order to have precisely this kind of dialogue. So I think we're in a much better place today than we were, let's say, a year ago, but there probably is need for more work. On the frozen assets, look, I am not privy to the latest conversations, but I just want to say the most important thing to retain. This money is not going back to Mr. Putin anytime soon, one. Secondly, this money, one way or another, will be leveraged to help for the reconstruction of Ukraine. That's the two basic principles. For the rest, there are complex legal issues about exactly how you do that, and I'm not going to here pretend that I have the answer to that, but the two fundamental points: the money is not going back anytime soon, and it will be leveraged to help the reconstruction of Ukraine. And I think that's what we have to stick to. Then we let the lawyers and the technicians figure out exactly in what format and how. I don't have the answer. On the issue of the fertilizers, the Commission has proposed to put heavy tariffs, very, very heavy tariffs on imports of fertilizers. This will be decided, it's not part of the sanctions package, it will actually be decided in co-decision, so the Parliament will have its voice in the matter, and it will be decided by qualified majority, so it's a trade measure rather than a sanctions measure, but it will have the same effect. I think it's fully understood. On the question of oil products, look, this has been a debate for some time, but I want to come back to the fundamentals that even if you take, for example, the oil, which is the processed oil, which is frequently imported from India, which is believed, which comes from Russian crude, this still represents about 3% of our consumption. So we need to continuously see if there are ways of further tightening the sanctions, but we have to put it in context. The oil we used to import is down by 90%. I mean, I think really, if you look at this, the breaking news story is how the European Union has decoupled itself from Russian energy, and not the fact that we still have some residual dependence, which we are working on getting out of the system, believe me, and we will be coming forward. I think the energy colleagues are coming forward in the next few weeks with Repower Europe to discuss the future of energy policy, because we need to look at this in the round on energy union. But the real story is the extent to which we have almost completely weaned ourselves off any dependence on Russian energy. And speaking personally, I hope we will never go back to such a dependence.
Thank you, David. And let's thank David O'Sullivan for his contribution to our hearing. And we wish you, David, really resistance to all the questions what you are facing, not being a political decision maker, but a diplomat. And now we have the honor of special intervention by His Excellency Vsevolod Chentsov, head of the mission of Ukraine to the European Union. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I will basically echo a lot of signals and messages which Ambassador Sullivan already delivered. But anyway, I wanted to use this opportunity to make a few points, to say thank you again to member states, to institutions for being with Ukraine, in particular keeping sanctions pressure on Russia, adopting 16 package, which was not easy exercise, tightening the grip, making sanctions working, and special thanks to Ambassador Sullivan for that. Companies from third countries, other enablers of Russia have been targeted and listed in the previous sanctions packages, and it works. And first of all, Russian economy is shrinking. Those statistics which Russia boasts about nominal GDP growth does not correspond to the real state of play. So the tanks and ammunition which the Russian economy produce now, they do not contribute to the well-being of the Russian people. As a result, inflation grows. So Russia is under serious pressure, and Russia cannot continue this war for long time, whatever Putin and Russian propaganda try to tell, which means that sanctions remain a very strong leverage on Russia, and European Union, Ukraine, like-minded countries should use this leverage properly. In that regard, it is important that European Union already start working on the next package. We also understand that there is an idea of to make the system more flexible, to go on, for instance, with the listings outside of the package, so which will help the Union and the institutions to catch political momentum when necessary, and to make sure that at the end Russia pays the price for this aggression. As I said, sanctions work. At the same time, we need to work hard to make it more difficult for Russia to circumvent the sanctions. And again, I wanted to remind about the idea of stronger non-Russia clause for the branches of the European companies in the third countries, because it is through the third countries Russia tries to buy different goods for its military machine. And also we need to make sure that Russia gets less and less revenues to support this war. And here we are talking about the shadow fleet. We need to use not only sanction pressure, but also other instruments to utilize fully international organizations like IMO, to also to make sure that this Russian shadow fleet is under huge pressure from the regulators, and different types of environmental and technical controls are in place to limit their access to market as much as possible, and limit Russian access to hard currency accordingly. And we don't, and we should not stop, and we should be ambitious and courageous to aim on different sectors of Russian economy which are still out of the sanction packages. I mean, Russian remaining part of the Russian financial sector. In the meanwhile, about 70% of assets of the Russian banks are under the sanctions, but still many Russian banks are used for different operations, including sanctions circumvention. And it's good that smaller or regional Russian banks found themselves in the 16 package. So we need to continue pushing in that direction. Also, Russian nuclear industry, Russian chemical industry, and the good development in that regard is the decision to increase the tariffs for the Russian fertilizers. In that regard, I wanted to make another point that the sanction pressure is also a very important instrument for the European companies to win the competition here in Europe and on other markets, because Russia very often undercut the prices, and the fertilizers market is a good example for that. But not only. Another phenomenon is that the Russian oligarchs, still not listed, some of them, they become richer and richer because they manage to benefit from war economy, in particular in the metallurgical and chemical industries. And it's very alarming news for us. It's also the result of this brutal war that that some of the Russian oligarchs, they managed to find kind of a new lucrative sectors for investment for themselves, be it logistics or, as I mentioned already, metallurgics, working both on the EU market, selling their products to the member states, but at the same time supplying material to the Russian war machine. So we should not be shy and keep them under the pressure. So I will probably skip my beautiful presentation regarding the how we can improve the sanction, our cooperation on to avoid circumvention, because ambassadors want to pay a lot of attention to this question. We have good coordination with EU, with like-minded countries, and it's on the question of Michael Galler, the platform exists, so we are working and we regularly meet, we exchange practice, but after all, it's in the member states' hands to make sure that the sanctions are implemented. So I will stop here and will be happy to answer the questions, if any.
Thank you, Ambassador. And again, 1-2 questions. Michael.
In the past, long before the war, and especially when the Yanukovych regime was still there, the customs authority had a certain reputation in Ukraine, a corrupt one, well, in the old days. And I'm aware that there has been intense reform on that before the war also. And in the meanwhile, has the war had, well, in all the tragic circumstances, has the war had a positive effect on the efficiency of your own customs services? Also, when you had certain things coming or going, and where you had a suspicion in which way that might have reached you, or have you any insight on, well, in spite of the war, what happens on your Belarusian border, or is there anything, or is anything coming through Moldova or Transnistria that is that ought to be not coming? Which are the possibilities there for your customs people, or is it only the border people who are controlling that? Is there anything in this regard where there is some development?
Thank you. And since I do not see any other willing to ask something, Ambassador.
Thank you for the question. The most important thing that our customs service, as basically all Ukrainian administration, are functional in spite of the war, and together with the bodyguards authorities, they were really on the front line during the first weeks and months of the Russian aggression, and many of them unfortunately lost their lives. Our facilities have been damaged, but the system is operational, and more than that, we undergo now quite a serious reform in coordination with the European Commission, in particular with TechSud. We pushed for the exchange of data, electronic exchange of data, which also will help to fix different irregularities, also to avoid corruption, and definitely it's a very serious part of our accession exercise to make sure that Ukrainian customs are fully aligned with their European peers. It's important for investments, it's important for the operations of the European and Ukrainian companies. So we are taking good care of this issue.
Thank you. Let's thank Ambassador, and we are at the end of the first introductory part of our hearing. We will change now. Both ambassadors and our colleague Andrzej Halicki will leave, and I invite to the podium Mr. Zukus, Hakemis, Madame Fredikšek, and Rybakova. So, David, thank you.
Thank you very much.
That was really successful. Thank you. Good. Come here, please.
Tā, mēs ar prezentāciju, ja? Paspēlēšanos tad ātri.
Tā.
Nu būs.
Let's begin this debate. Our panelists are here on the podium, and the first will tell us about the practices what we have in Latvia, and also the cooperation what we have with other Baltic states on customs services. Mr. Raimons Zukuls, Director of the National Customs Board of Latvia. The floor is yours.
Thank you for introduction, and I directly will go to presentation. Please, if you can put it on the screen.
Yeah. Is it?
Oh, there it is. And first of all, I would like to say that Latvia, and of course you know where Latvia is, but it's quite a unique situation because we have a border with both Russia and Belarus. And yes, also our Lithuanian colleagues can object that they also have a border with Russia, but not with mainland of the Russia. And I would like to begin and start with that. If we are speaking about any sanctions, they should be aligned for Russia and Belarus, because from the beginning there were approximately 4,500 CN codes items sanctioned for Russia and only 1,500 sanctioned for Belarus, which means that it not worked very well, but these things were aligned with 8 package for Belarus, which from point of view of customs are quite good. I will jump over some of the slides. It will be possible for you to have a presentation and to take a look at them, but we'll stress some main things. Via Latvia, actually there goes road to Moscow, not only for Latvian exports, but for exports from the whole European Union. And of course it influences us a lot. Approximately 80% from all exports that we are closing comes from other European Union countries. But it's quite normal, quite okay, because of course we are border country on east. From point of view of customs, for, 30 years, and I believe still in some in Western Europe here, customs can hear one thing: do your work more quicker. be more quicker, trade facilitation and things like that. It completely changed, at least in Latvia, and I believe also in Estonia, Lithuania, Finland, Poland, that from quicker we went to more accurate. Take your time. There was not such a big pressure from politicians and society on how fast customs is working, but please, if you are doing some cases with sanctions, be more accurate, precise, and if it's necessary, take your time to check something. There are some figures how dropped or amount, how many lorries, how many cargoes went through the customs control points, but it also, because, a lot of countries and also some customs control points in Latvia we closed, but for example, Finland closed it completely, border with Russia. Some customs control points closed it in Estonia and Lithuania. If we are looking at import or export, you can see that when war began, there is quite a little bit bigger drop in import from Russia, but export even grew. It was growth of export for first couple of years. The next slide is trade with Central Asian countries, and yes, of course, part of that is trade diversification, but I also believe that part of it is circumvention of sanctions. That these countries were used and still used to deliver some goods to Russia or Belarus. There is a slide about export declarations from which countries are mainly, they come and close exports in Latvia, but maybe not so important. I will jump to this slide. On the top you can see the first column is how many some violations in sanctions we find out during the year. And actually before the war, Russian-Ukrainian war, this column was, I don't know, maybe some couple of cases. Yeah. The main thing was some seized goods like cigarettes from Belarus. And for us, it takes approximately 60% of all resources that customs spending on customs controls. Yeah, if you can imagine, from 100 controls, 60 controls goes to sanctions. And these irregularities that we found out, approximately 90% is at export side and 10% at import side. And I said it in different audiences, and I will say it also here, we see that sanctions work because Russia tried quite desperately to get a lot of items. Mainly these circumventions that we discovered is on export, goods that goes to Russia. And of course, I also would like to mention that if Russia really will want some good or item, they will get it, but it will cost them more. Maybe via, I don't know, Arab Emirates or via India or whatever in the globe, but it will not be so easy. I will skip to next one. The main trends of violations, very shortly, main things that CN code of goods are changing. Somebody who want to circumvent the sanctions, they are changing CN codes. Then the second one is that there are some play, if I can say so, with country of origin or country of destination. It's declared for customs that the goods will go to, for example, central Kazakhstan, but they never reach Kazakhstan or will go to Kazakhstan and after that send it to Russia. Then illogical route is quite popular. Some things with luxury goods, and for us, for customs, and it's not only for Latvia, it's also for our colleagues, when new sanction package comes, there always some period of time that you still can bring something to Russia or Belarus, like fulfill your contract. And it is used very often by not good guys, if I can say so. Yeah, because if they bring me a contract and there's a date that, for example, last month's date, but sometimes you can see that ink is still wet. Yeah, it's sorry for comparison. What are the answers to these challenges? Quite simple, maybe, but it's a cooperation. we are really on a one line with colleagues from the European Commission, Olaf, or Financial Investigation Unit of Latvia, who are responsible actually for sanctions, also, and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and of course all our partners, neighbor countries, and so. 5 countries, by initiative of, from Lithuania, 5 countries signed an agreement of cooperation, and these countries are, I mentioned again, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, and afterwards also Croatia joined to that initiative. The idea of this agreement, that we are asking for same documentation, like a unified approach at whole border, because if countries are asking for different things, you know, those who want to circumvent to bring these goods to Russia or bring from Russia, they can try to use the weakest link. One more thing, before some photos, we also have quite a good, not a quite good, but cooperation with Central Asian countries improved. Because if we have some doubts still, documentation is okay, goods are okay, but something we feel that maybe is not okay with this import or export operation, we are writing and communicating with Central Asian countries and receiving answers. And the statistic shows that more than 60% we are receiving answers that something is wrong. That or they are replying to us that we never sent these goods to you, or we never received from you. Of course, we are writing only in cases that we have quite a strong doubts. Not in all cases, it's logical, yeah, because then it will be thousands and thousands of requests. And some practical examples how it looks, why I put this one, this was the first case. The first case, actually, in our history is nowadays 3 years, close to 3 years ago, when somebody just adding a packet of nails said that it's not wood materials anymore, but it's a building constructions, and it don't goes under the sanctions. The second one, you can see like example of a logical route, that somebody from Romania trying to go to Georgia, but doing additionally 2,000 kilometers, and in that case we do not believe, and sending back such kind of cargoes. Cars transit from European Union to Uzbekistan, and by this agreement that I showed before, we had a right to ask for manufacturer declaration, and then we received it with grammar mistakes, and it looked like it was made, I don't know, in ChatGPT or something like that, and it led to criminal case. Of course, some forged documents, something more serious, where there was in declarations they put it that it's agricultural machinery parts, but actually some microschemes that you can use in military equipment. So something more serious too. From Russia actually, but declared that from Kazakhstan, metal bars, 10 wagons. Quite interesting situation is with cars, because still now there is Russian web pages where you can go in, and by VIN number, you know, each car has a VIN number. By VIN number, you can check if this car is registered in Russia. And this web internet sites, they are working still now. And what we did, we took 3 months of all cars that went via Latvia, of course, not destined for Russia, but we found that 72 or something % are actually registered in Russia at the end of the day. Maybe they first bring them to Central Asian countries, but and after that to Russia. And then we pointed quite a big attention to exporters from whole Europe who are exporting these cars, like sellers of the cars. Yeah? And I believe that sellers in Europe countries also can do this small check and maybe do not sell to those who do such things. One clever guy screwed off the wheels and said that it's not a cars anymore. It's a spare parts for cars, but it was like maybe a little bit funny. False origin of gold, again declared as Kazakh origin, but actually it's Russian origin. But this picture is not here. The top of all was one guy tried to smuggle in cigarettes, but he put it into the wooden materials who was under the sanctions. And this was the best thing that we found out, because we did not found cigarettes at the beginning. We thought, oh, it's sanctioned goods. And after a couple of weeks, when we make a deeper search, we found also cigarettes inside this cargo. This is how we are dealing. I want to say that we changed our daily routine to give more resources to sanctions. And it's, I believe there's no need for me to tell that, especially in Latvia and also in other Baltic states, how we feel about Russia or Belarus, and we think that we are doing our part by doing our job to stop the war. And what Mr. Sullivan said, some part of this money that did not get to Russia's pocket is also our job. Thank you very much, and if you will have any questions.
Questions will be at the end of the panel, and thank you, Raimonds, for your presentation of everyday life of our customs services. And I can imagine that this is a huge pressure on the human resources of customs services to have the increase of almost 90% of export going to Russia to check it. So now I will ask our Finnish colleague, Jiri Häkämies, who is Managing Director of Confederation of Finnish Industries. And I think you have a lot to tell, because Finland has the longest border with Russia of all member states in the European Union.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. I represent the Confederation of Finnish Industries, and we have 15,000 company members, and they represent about 2/3 of Finnish GDP and representing different kind of business sectors. And as our chairman just said, that we have the longest border between EU and Russia previously with the Soviet Union, so we have witnessed and lived different kind of years and after Second World War, and I have to say that now we are witnessing and living one of the most serious time. And I just want to refer what David Sullivan said, that now it's not the time to lift the sanctions when Russia has the hardest. And in general, Finland and the Finnish businesses very strongly committed to EU sanctions. Couple of facts about the trade before the Russian aggressive attack to Ukraine. And Russia was one of the biggest trading partners to Finland. It represents 5% of our export, 12% of our import, energy, natural gas, oil, and timber. And also our member companies had invested quite a lot to Russia, building factories there and so on. And now the balance is almost zero, and this shows what is the situation at the moment. And of course, this has been a dramatic change in our economy, and especially to our eastern areas of Finland, because Russia represented in export, import, tourism, and so on, important part of especially in those areas. As I said, that our companies had invested to Russia, they made a very quick and strong exit from Russia, and this is verified by Yale University and Kiev School of Economics. And even though we haven't received any signals or messages from our companies to desire to return to Russia, this was a hard experience and a very difficult process to sell the fortune in Russia, but they did so. and we are very proud of that. Then a couple of words about compliance and challenges. We have asked from our members about the sanctions, and the latest survey showed that 94%, almost 100%, expressed their backing for sanctions, even though they are hurting our business, and the economic growth has been many years near zero. But still, our companies, they support the sanctions. But there are, even though they have exited from Russia, there are at least two challenges. As David Sullivan spoke about, this circumvention is one, and reputational damage is the other, that especially concerning export to third countries. And when we are talking about new business relationships, this reputational damage is also very important. And our companies and my organization, but especially our member companies, they have invested a lot to compliance. And for example, Nordea Bank, they have 3,000 compliance employees for sanctions and compliance issues. So this shows that these are very difficult questions. And David Sullivan spoke a lot about information sharing and all these things. Then a couple of messages. I have 5 messages. First of all, support EU sanctions. As I said, that this is not the time to lift the sanctions, and they are very important. And hopefully, USA stays in the alliance. The second is addressing the shadow fleet. Also mentioned already that we support enhanced measures to monitor and sanction these vessels better. And it's also environmental challenge, especially in the Baltic Sea. You can imagine that. Third, end user checks. That implementing end user checks for goods exported to third countries, and for example, institutions like Olaf could do something in this area. The fourth one is establishment of SME sanction help desk, and this has already come through. That EU is establishing this kind of help desk because SMEs doesn't have that kind of resources and the compliance resources that they should have an information desk where to ask help and advice. And then the fifth one is when we are talking about rebuilding Ukraine and remodernizing Ukraine, we need to have a so-called digital credit information register to facilitate this kind of register for export, especially to dual-use goods to Ukraine, and that companies could have a reliable information about the counterparts in Ukraine. This is very important in order to avoid certain problems. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, and especially particularly for these last 5 proposals, which is needed to succeed in the control of sanctions, and particularly I think important is SME help desk to provide the information, and the idea about digital credit information desk. It's also very, very important when the reconstruction will begin. So, and now I will ask to share with us her information, Madame Veronika Friedrichek.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me. Let me start maybe with a broader introduction, building on what was said in the first part of the discussion. So when we were defining the priorities of Polish presidency, maximizing support for Ukraine and maximizing pressure on Russia featured very high on our agenda. And I think these days, this priority or these priorities are even more relevant than ever. So I also agree with my 4 speakers that it is now the moment to do more faster and to continue the policy. As it has been said, the EU, and I think I will be never tired of repeating this, that the EU sanctions policy has turned out to be really an effective tool, and the EU has shown unity and the ability to react swiftly. So I mean not only the scope of the sanctions that were adopted, because almost every sector of Russian economy is affected by sanction, but also the speed. We have also over 2,500 individuals covered by EU sanctions. And indeed, those measures hurt Russian economy. And I think it's also worth repeating this and making clear, because this is also part of the propaganda and the false narrative that we have to challenge, that Russian economy is really struggling hard and will not be sustainable in this form for a long time. I would also like just to mention that in addition to the sectorial and individual sanctions against Russia, we have also introduced recently new sanctions regime, one targeting those responsible for human rights violation in Russia, and also a dedicated regime addressing hybrid actions or destabilizing activities by Russia. This is also, I think, a success of the EU, and there's space also to broaden the scope of those sanctions. And of course, there's also a scope to broaden the sectorial sanctions. Much has been said already by my 4 speakers. I think sectors such as civilian nuclear energy, LNG, shadow fleet, this is definitely where we have to look at. And, you know, we have just adopted the 16th package, but we already hear many member states and actors preparing for the 17th package. The issue of frozen assets, that was also mentioned in the questions. I think this is also an area that we have to look at, and this is clear that it is not up to the to European taxpayer to pay for the damages caused by Russian aggression, but we have but this money should definitely be used to the benefit of Ukraine and its reconstruction. Of course, circumvention and implementation of sanctions is a huge challenge. With every next package of sanctions, we try to, in addition to extending the scope of the sanctions, we are also trying to close the loopholes and to see how to close the gap, how to improve how to avoid circumvention. I think an important factor is also Belarus. We have been, for a long time, we have been struggling and asking for mirroring the sanctions against Russia in the regime targeting Belarus. Because of the simple reason we have a customs union, so it was the easiest way to circumvent those measures in place against Russia. And we are happy that in the last 2 packages of sanctions, we had at the same time the measures replicated in both regimes. Now, when it comes to implementation and challenges, I think, first of all, the sanctions can be only as effective as the member states and national authorities implement them, because it is the responsibility of individual member states. And of course, we have differences in legal frameworks, differences in resources of the member states. and their priorities. And the Polish presidency has identified 3 key challenges among the national authorities. The first one is acquiring information, second one is information sharing, and interpreting regulations. It's clear that the enforcement gaps, and it's also opens opportunities for unreliable operators to exploit inconsistencies between member states and threatening fair competition on the internal market. The initiative of the Baltic States and Finland and Poland and Croatia was mentioned by Mr. Zukuls. Maybe just to elaborate a bit about this idea. I think generally at EU level what we should also improve is enhancing the data exchange, reporting on suspicious transactions, perhaps also expanding artificial intelligence tools and data analysis. So this is all we have to consider at EU level. Right now we have this memorandum between this number of member states with external border, and in this memorandum we committed ourselves, the customs administrations committed themselves to additional measures such as refusing to release goods with illogical transport routes. We have seen a good illustration. Requesting also additional documentation for transits from Russia and Belarus, requiring the manufacturers to confirm end-user awareness and compliance with sanctions, verifying export documents, particularly in cross-border transactions. There is definitely also space to work more on at EU27 level, because, as I said, I mean, the more we create gaps, have gaps and inconsistencies, the more effective the sanctions will be.
Thank you, Ambassador. What I allowed in your presentation, first of all, that there should be mirroring between of sanctions between Russia and Belarus, and also broaden the scope, and to replicate and enlarge this understanding among Baltic, Croatian, and Finnish and Polish customs services to all 20 on the level of all member states. That would be really to make efficient tool against circumvention of sanctions. And now let's try to join Elena Rybakova. She is Director of International Affairs Program and Vice President for Foreign Policy at the Kiev School of Economies. She will be with us remotely, and that's why there will not be provided translation. We will listen at her in English. Elena Rybakova, you are most welcome.
Thank you so much. First of all, I want to say thank you for everybody here who works so hard to make sanctions effective, to make sure that Russia has less and less resources to be able to continue the war on Ukraine and threaten sovereignty of the whole European continent. With that, I will talk mostly about 3 key items. One is about Russian economy, and I'll speak a little bit more about Russian military-industrial defense sector. We have a report coming up on soon with that, so please stay tuned. The second one, I'll talk a little bit about Russia-China cooperation. And then finally, I'll talk a little bit about US-Russia relationship, how it's evolving, and what the European Union can do in that respect. So many topics to cover, but we have a bit of time. So very quickly, given that my colleagues here already gave the big presentations on the Russian economy, including David O'Sullivan, I want to say that not only Russian economy is not doing that well, even the sectors that were the key drivers of Russian economy, which is military-industrial complex, has beginning to contract in January. So you look at the analysis, whether it's industrial output, and you try to break it up by different sector, or some of the comments that the Russians analytical centers and the authorities are making themselves. January, actually, you're seeing a contraction. So the sectors that used to drive the economy are beginning to slow down, and everything else actually has been flatlining since the beginning of the war. I think that is very important to understand. Russia has become very much a weaponized sort of a war economy, but even in this military-industrial sector, we're seeing problems. What are the problems that these companies are complaining about? Well, about the same things. They have not enough labor because people are being sent to die on the front line, or they physically have not enough labor to produce Kalashnikovs. At the same time, they're also facing high interest rates. Yes, they're getting subsidized credits. Yes, Pромsvязьbank and VEB and others are giving them subsidized credits, but even then they're struggling and they're not having a strong enough financial performance. They're struggling from these high interest rates. And then also, despite all the support that they're getting from the government, and let's not forget, Russia spends just from the federal budget 8% of GDP on the military. But this is just the direct lines that can be identified. This is military and the internal security. But then, as you can imagine, other sectors, healthcare, categories in the budget are also related to the military. Regional budgets contribute, and of course, the subsidized credit contributes. So Russia is spending more, the highest level since the post-Soviet times, and yet the industry is saying they're not being profitable. And then to finish it off, Russian industry used to sell a lot of hard equipment to India, China, some other countries. Now, those contracts were actually very profitable because now they're having to switch to producing what is needed for the war on Ukraine. Some of these contracts apparently are not profitable. So they're also lost some of the lucrative export contracts, and it might be hard for them to come back. So we need to remember that sanctions are working. Russia has retooled into the war economy, but even then it is struggling to keep up pace. It also is a good reminder, what are the incentives for Russian politicians to stop the war? If you think about the global financial crisis, many people here remember, when you have a bubble in your country, it's very hard to prick that bubble because you see some, social lifts emerging. Weaker regions are catching up a bit. You have maybe some investments happening in this. Yes, long term, this is a very strong misallocation of resources, of both human capital and investment. But in the short term, it creates some sort of activity in your economy. And of course, you don't want to prick that bubble. So my concern is that the Russia's war economy, albeit slowing down and more poor, it is potentially an incentive for Russia to continue the war. Because imagine, what are you going to tell all these people who come back from the war and that, maybe the factories that used to produce all this heavy equipment and missiles that go to Ukraine will have to stop? Because some of the export contracts have been lost already, and there are different types of equipment that is needed, and also not the same volumes. So you will have even harder lending in the domestic economy, and lots of unemployed people, some of them ex-combatants, some of them are also former prisoners that then are ex-combatants that are coming back home. So politically, it also generates a very difficult situation in Russia internally. So I will move on now to the next point, China. And it is related to Russia's military-industrial complex. The complex has failed to modernize over the last 20 years. No matter what Putin recommendations that you should produce more for civilian economy, you should produce more innovative projects, as some of the colleagues have signaled here, for anything somewhat more sophisticated from the military-industrial complex, Russia needs either Western or sometimes Chinese, but mostly Western imports. So Russia's more sophisticated equipment and machinery is 70, 80, and 90%, and this is military machinery. We're not talking about washing machines or toothbrushes, sorry. Those are dependent on foreign components, and this is something that Russia has struggled forever, and it continues to struggle. Here, China has stepped in as an important partner. So China buys a lot of Russian oil and gas, and at the same time ships some of these critical components to Russia. Anything marginally more sophisticated for the military, they tend to get from China. However, let's not forget, for Russia, China now accounts for more than 30% of overall trade. Russia for China accounts, I think, less than Netherlands. I think it's just 4% of China's trade. So for China still, US, Europe, and other countries are so much more important as trade partners. The second point is that China now, for example, could come in and buy any investment projects it wants because Russia is desperate for money and investment. Nonetheless, you see almost no investment going from China. There is talk, there is commitments of about 200 billion investment projects, but none of them took off the ground. Most notably, the Power of Siberia 2, the gas project, is going nowhere. So China is being very pragmatic. They're interacting, they're having the flows, they're having the sort of the trade turnover with Russia. They're shipping some of our Western components to Russia, but they're not doing investment projects. So it tells you something that, you know, and in the surveys, Chinese companies say that sanctions are working, that's one, but then also the unpredictable Russian environment and lack of rule of law are something that Chinese companies are worried about. If you look at the Russian press, there apparently more than 2,000 new Chinese companies have registered in Russia, but 90% of them are in wholesale retail trade. So really, these are companies, it's like a one-day companies made focused on either, you know, some simple consumer goods or maybe this on shipment of the goods. So I think that's important. Which now takes me to the third point, US-Russia relationship. And here I do want to, again, thank everybody who's working so hard because, as David and others have said, now Europe will have to be at the center of standing against Russia. Because what we're seeing in the US is definitely signals that Russia trying to negotiate removal of sanctions. And of course, Russian authorities have been saying for 3 years that sanctions are not working, yet one of the first things, if not the first thing they ask for, apart from the maximalist demands in Ukraine, they're asking for removal of sanctions. So if they're not working, why are you talking about? But Russian authorities, and we see also from the press in the US, that maybe the administration has US Treasury to look into ways what kind of sanctions could be removed. You know, there are indications, as well as from the Russian side, that they're coming very prepared. They've looked very closely what sanctions are there, what sanctions are very much hurting them, and what sanctions are coordinated between the US and the EU, and where also the US potentially has a little bit more power. And they're already trying to push through that message to the US administration. Have a look. We would like to have sanctions relief as part of these negotiations. And we're seeing signs of that in the press already. There's another aspect where apparently, you know, the US administration thinks US companies and other companies might want to come back to Russia and do business. Well, let's not forget that there is no business actually now to be made in Russia. People who think about the heyday of Russian growth, you know, 7% average growth, double-digit real wage growth, when did it happen? It happened during the commodities supercycle. It happened from 2000 until roughly 2014, with a short break for 2008 global financial crisis. Oil price then increased from $13 per barrel, 1.3, to $140 per barrel. And of course, Russia, which exports 85% is oil and gas and commodities, so 60% is oil and gas, and another so much more, you know, to take it to 85 is commodities. Russia exports commodities. Of course, it's boomed during that period. And many foreign companies felt that's fine. I will deal with the political risk. Even though, you know, even there is political risk, I will deal with it because I have these wonderful returns coming up. Well, what is happening now? Oil price is actually coming down. Nobody expects oil price to go up significantly. Russia has become even more concentrated on making revenues from oil and gas and spending it onto the war economy. So any foreign company coming in will not be let into the oil and gas sector, maybe a little bit on the margin. They will definitely not be let into the military-industrial complex. And then there's also not real middle class, because the middle class used to come from the trickle-down effect of higher commodity prices. There's no more middle class. So for foreign companies, there's very little money to be made in Russia, even if there would be an opening. And if you look, where I talked about the Chinese companies have all the possible opening in Russia, and yet they're not investing. And we shouldn't forget that foreign companies already now, and thank you for colleagues who mentioned the from Finland, from Kyiv School of Economics study, there's just another study that came out. Foreign companies lost $170 billion in assets in Russia already. Most of the companies now, there are very few left, but these companies were held hostage and they couldn't exit Russia. They have a reduction in their rights in Russia as well, well before any conversation about frozen Russian reserve assets. And now it takes me to the last point, and I'll be very brief and to the point. So what Europe can do? Europe can do three very important things, which it has been doing and can do more of. One is the shadow fleet. For the shadow fleet of Russia, we've seen designations by European Union, by UK, as well as the US. So Europe sits at the core of the Russia's ability to ship this oil around Europe, potentially highly risky for our shores because of the environmental risk and lack of insurance by Russian companies. And Europe is already taking very important steps. It can block off that route or significantly reduce that route. If you look at the analytical data or research, not just by me, but also by the US Dallas Fed colleagues, for example, the fact that Europe cut off the embargo by the European Union was so much more impactful on Russian oil revenues than the oil price cap. So European Union does have an important sort of handle here. The second one, and I will not talk much, is this export controls that my colleagues have talked about, the strengthening of export controls and being the leader in this area. And the last one is frozen assets. Frozen assets, we have different arguments against that. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to get into countermeasures. But oftentimes we hear an argument about the financial stability risk. Well, what does it mean? It means that there are certain sovereign wealth funds, for example, Saudi or China, that are holding government bonds of European Union. Of course, they want to hold government bonds of the European Union because it gives them diversification from holding US treasuries. And given what's happening in the US, of course, you want to have some sort of diversification. European Union, euro, is the second reserve currency, and it's a very important one at that. So what we have heard before is, for example, Saudis and others will saying, look, I'm going to dump your bonds if you take over Russian assets. Well, what's going to happen then? The European Union, the ECB, has the tool to protect against the sort of politically motivated attacks on the European markets. They have the temporary tools, they have the long-term tools. If the ECB also comes out with similar whatever it takes that we have seen in the European debt crisis, well, very quickly other investors will jump into the opportunity. And all that will happen by the sovereign fund, for example, Saudi, dropping treasury bonds of the French treasury, they will lose money, and then very quickly, most likely, they will have to come back. So if there is a credible enough threat against it or protection of whatever it takes, if you try to dump these bonds for political motivation, we'll stand there with our ECB TPI instrument. Most likely, actually, we will call their bluff and they will say, you know what, it's actually not worth it for me to lose the money, make the point, and help Russians who are actually also our competitors oftentimes in the oil market. So I will stop here. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you, Elena Rybakova, and particularly for your advice what the European Union has to do, because we are aware that we have to block shadow fleet, and we also are aware that we have to implement more extra control on the sanctions. But about frozen assets, that is never-ending debate, and we are standing on your positions, but let's hope that also Belgian government and others will understand why we are there and will not be afraid on the stabilization of euro. So thank you. We have a few minutes for questions, and I already received one request for a question, which is from Dirk Schöbel, who is head of the Russian delegation in External Affairs Service. Dirk, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Russia Division, if I may just say, head of the Russia Division in the European External Action Service, indeed. Thank you for giving me the floor. I thought I can maybe add a few words to what David O'Sullivan has said before, and also maybe to react to a few comments that have been given. A very interesting discussion. Thank you very much for having me here. So first of all, perhaps a few additional words on the 16th package that we have recently published, just to also tell you that we are also flexible. We are adapting also our approach in our sanctions packages to the new modalities, to the attempts of Russia to circumvent sanctions. So to give you, so circumventions was at the core of the 16th package, if I may say like this. To give you a few examples, for the first time, the EU has imposed full-fledged sanctions. That means travel ban, assets freeze, prohibition to make funds available on various Chinese actors, which were supplying drone components, satellite imagery, and microelectronic components in support of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. We have also added 85 entities subject to stricter export restrictions with respect to dual-use goods and technology and advanced technology items. More than half of these 85 entities are not from Russia, but they are from third countries. They are from third countries such as China, India, Iran, Serbia, Kazakhstan, Turkey, Uzbekistan, Singapore, and the United Arab Emirates, just to tell you this. Perhaps also to remind everyone that our objective is not only to impose an as heavy price as possible on Russia, but also to minimize adverse effects on our own industry. So some of the questions that some of you might have, why is this and why is this and that not been done, is also due to the fact that it might have a very detrimental effect on our own industry. A few more issues. We have put shadow fleet was mentioned. Obviously, that is a top priority for us at this moment, also to eliminate as much as possible this problem. So in the latest package, we have added another 74 vessels to the list of sanctions, which means altogether we have now sanctions 153 vessels alone. We have also put we have also withdrawn EU broadcasting licenses for 8 Russian media outlets. Also, propaganda has been a very important element of the Russian war machinery to accompanying the whole process. And perhaps also to say that 53 new entities are subject to tighter export controls under so-called Annex 4, due to directly supporting Russia's military and industrial complex, was also mentioned by several speakers before. A third of these entities are Russian, but others are located as well in third countries. China, including Hong Kong, India, Kazakhstan, Singapore, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, and Uzbekistan, again, just to mention those. Apart from these sanctions packages, I also wanted to say that we have also other sanctions packages vis-à-vis Russia. I wanted to mention the hybrid sanctions because sanctions, it's not only products and goods that are reinforcing the war machinery, but of course Russia also tries to hit us here in the European Union with hybrid measures. So we have established at the end of last year in November a separate Russia hybrid sanctions program, and we have already concluded and adopted one package, and we are now in the middle of preparing the second package, which we hopefully can adopt soon and conclude soon. And last point from my side, we have also a human rights Russia sanctions package, which, because as we have said many a time, external repression, external aggression goes hand in hand with internal repression. So we think that it's also important to not forget Russia, domestic Russia, and therefore we have also this special sanctions program on human rights, which we are also working on, and hopefully will also have in the future a new package. I'll stop here. Of course, the EAS remains ready to answer any of your questions as well, if you have any.
Thank you. Thank you very much for introducing in detail some of the sanctions which were adopted by 16th package. And I have another speaker who wants to ask the question.
Thank you.
Freudenstein.
Yes, thank you, Sandra. I'm Roland Freudenstein from the Free Russia Foundation. We're still around. We represent pro-democracy Russians. And very much want to work with the European Union in improving the sanctions regime and making it harder for Putin to continue his aggression against Ukraine. So just 2 brief points. One is your general analysis that has been forwarded here by by many people that the sanctions are working much better than public opinion and some media try to make it sound in the West is absolutely our analysis too. Our sanctions czar, if I may say so, Vladimir Milov, who puts out regular updates on the Russian economy and sanctions, has exactly the same analysis. But here's my question, and this is especially to Elena Rybakova, who gave a fantastic presentation, by the way. Thank you so much for this. So what is your assessment? Which sectors of the US business community would be most eager to start back business with Russia, maybe even go into sectors where the US wasn't so strong in bilateral business relations? And how do we best prepare for the internal debate in the European Union? Because some of our businesses are going to very quickly say that, oh, well, if the Americans are going back, why can't we, I mean, so is there some intelligence? Is there some guesswork on what exactly we have to look at here when and if America goes back to business with Russia? Thank you.
Roland, thank you for your pertinent questions. And Elena, can you respond, please?
Yes, thank you. I think you already seen in the press what Russia really wants is to sell energy back to the EU. So the only immediate reaction we've seen in the press is some sort of supposed I'm using the FT here, closed door negotiations about restarting one of the Nord Stream 2. So it tells you where the US interests really are. Because if you think about it, what we talked about, this commodity supercycle, that removes a lot of profitability from Russia. So US used to import oil, right, or wasn't such an important producer of oil or gas. From 2014, it's changed dramatically. So in many cases, Russia and the US are actually direct competitors. So they're going into oil and gas in Russia, or even especially supporting Russia's export of oil and gas to Europe, it's against macroeconomic interests of the US. There might be some individual companies that are hoping to make money, or individuals who are hoping to make money, but it's definitely not in the interest of the broader US business. So oil and gas, maybe some companies that do maintenance, I don't know, some specific, I don't know, I'm giving an example, I don't want to blame anybody, Schlumberger, for example, S&P now, but basically some companies on the margin that might be interested to do some work. Then you think about banks. Banks follow their multilaterals, right? Multinational companies, sorry. Some banks are still in Russia, Citigroup is still in Russia, I think JP Morgan still does some work. So maybe they will be more interested in the markets. But for them, they need to have a full sanctions relief to be able to be operational. And again, they don't tend to work with the local companies because it's just too difficult, and it was the case before 2022. They work much less with individuals because there is, again, much less money to be made. So yes, maybe on the margin they want to do something, but not really. They want to support their companies and do a bare minimum. So then if you go next to the fast-moving consumer goods or electronics, if you expect double-digit real wage growth in Russia to continue or to pick up, then yes, there is some interest and you could come in back into the market. But again, we're not expecting strong growth from Russia, right? And if anything, if there is an end or sort of ceasefire to the war, you will have a lot of unemployed people. So again, does it make business sense for you to go in? And then finally, US companies or any company should not forget, you have just written off billions of dollars, 170 billion at least, 45 billion for the US companies alone. So you're going to go back to a compliance officer and your board members and say, why don't I go back, invest some more billions, and 4 years down the road, who knows, maybe we'll have a change in administration and the sanctions regime vis-a-vis Russia changes completely. So I think for that, one should also look at the case of Iran, where the first time around sort of companies came back, but much less. The second time around, when the US pulled out, nobody really came back. So find it as a macroeconomist, I find it very skeptical that there will be companies really rushing to come in. I think maybe some online sellers, maybe Boeing that would like to buy some titanium from Russia, but not really an en masse kind of interest that is being promoted in the press.
Thank you, Elena, very much for your concise and very dense response. Thank you. We are approaching the end of our discussions, and now for the conclusions, I would invite Michael Gahler. Can you come? No, please. We want to look you in the eyes. Michael Gahler, he is coordinator for Committee of Foreign Affairs and also standing rapporteur on Ukraine.
Well, yes, thank you very much for this, comprehensive overview that we have received here. I think politically speaking, we are all here, at least in the EPP framework, of the opinion that we must continue the sanctions also after a ceasefire and not from one day to another start lifting them. So we must politically resist such temptations, be they coming from the industry, from the economy, or from the one or the other member states. And one good argument is in this regard that we do not accept the allegation that the sanctions don't work. We should not accept this narrative. We have had the figures 260 billion before the war of trade, 68 billion now. That is 74% less. I think these figures speak for themselves. In the meanwhile, let us check and, if necessary, double-check member states' implementation practice, because that differs widely. And I think we should, as in many policy areas, definitely apply best practice. And if there is a memo of understanding of the eastern border states how to mutually inform themselves or inform each other and work together and share information, that practice should definitely be applied EU-wide. I think another aspect that was mentioned and is important and is not yet fully done, it's the mirroring of Russian sanctions for Belarus. Apparently there is a good development that in the recent packages they have been included, but I'm also aware of, for instance, that wasn't mentioned here, but I was told recently that in the sanctions packages on Belarus they did not include civilian trucks. I mean, any civilian truck can, of course, be used for also for military transport purposes in the supply chains and so on. And I think on such concrete examples, we can see that we can improve a lot. With regard to the shadow fleet, I think we are on a good track there. Apparently, we have by now registered 150 of these ships, which may not enter our ports. And accordingly, in parallel, apparently, the host country states, or the flag states, mostly small island states in the Caribbean and the Pacific, they have been contacted by us and also agreed to deregister these ships from their registers. I think that is also something that goes in the positive direction. I think part of the narrative from those who do not want the sanctions is that they harm us more than the Russians. I think that is also definitely not true. Facts and figures in this regard shall and must be countered and be made public in order to give arguments in this for us in this regard. I mean, we have seen examples from Latvia, from Finland, and from, there was a third country, Latvian customs and from Finland, learning about some creative ways how certain people try to bypass or circumvent the sanctions, but what we have seen shows that there's quite an efficient way to uncover such practice. And the figures for Finland, I found it interesting because it serves also as an argument for those who are far away and wouldn't like to apply it. A country with a border of 1,341 kilometers, who suffered 5% exports and 12% import losses because of they are now at zero. When you have the political will and develop the necessary resilience, you can stand it. And that is, insofar, I think, also a best practice example from our Finnish friends that we can be supportive of that. We have there were other aspects. I'm just going through my notes a bit. There was a mention made by Mr. Schübel that we have established a separate Russian hybrid and sanctions program, also for hybrid sanctions program and also for individuals. I think everything that serves this purpose in this regard must be also continued, and the political will must definitely be maintained. I'm just looking. Overall, if I draw a line below, so to say, to summarize, I think it is worthwhile to continue to support our approach there. Be creative and learn from the practice where third countries are bypassing it, how we can counter that. I think also from my personal contacts with the German Bundesausfuhramt, the German export agency, when I asked them about their knowledge about, third country going then via these third countries to Russia, on the working level, my impression is there is also quite some frustration because they see it, that things are going to countries where they have never gone before, and we know where it ends up. But there is apparently no political will yet, or hasn't been, for us to have sanctions on these countries. I think there's a special secondary sanctions to apply that. I think certain countries deserve to be applied these secondary sanctions because they do it deliberately, or perhaps even the threat thereof is something that would hinder them from continuing their malpractice. But that is another issue that should be also addressed. There were other aspects mentioned, but I'm stopping here. I think it was quite an insightful event, and I thank all the participants from my side as well.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you very much for your extensive conclusions, and I will use immediately, hot on the spot, and I will ask you, would you consider that a AFET mission to the eastern border of European Union would be of use to get directly acquainted with all the difficulties and practice?
Well, I would spontaneously say, as long as we stay inside, it's not an AFET mission. No, perhaps there are other committees. No, there are other committees. There are other committees who would be jealous, probably. Yeah? So, in this regard, we could do a joint mission with those who check that, and to see how things in practice are working. I'm told there are very interesting installations that a container doesn't have to be opened, but they are screened. These are things that are working and functioning and also on a big capacity, but that can also be, in many regards, be enlarged in scope, probably.
Thank you, Michael. I see that you are engaging yourself, and we will try to in cooperation with other committees to find the way how to have the mission. But I also want to say that it is impossible to go outside EU border to Belarus or to Russia. So the only way is to stay close to border and see how it works. So at the end, I would like to thank every participant for the contribution to this important discussion, and this debate has reinforced the urgency of the issue, and we must remain committed to our efforts, and we must ensure that we stay engaged on the ground and take concrete action moving forward. And let us continue to work together and to strengthen our response and preserve our values and to support Ukraine by controlling and trying to prevent the circumvention of the sanctions, and also imposing new sanctions to those areas where they are the most painful for Russia. So thank you, everybody.
Paldies, kā saka, cerams, ka vismaz 5 kapeikas palīdzēja.
Nu, tās dažas svarīgās personas jau šeit bija. Dāvids Salivans, jā, un tāpat arī Gālēns.
Pie mums bija Rīgā, ka mēs viņu aizvedām uz visādiem ciemiemiem.